Welcome to the Kingdom Culture Podcast that was created on purpose with a purpose to empower, uplift, and guide others to the center of God's perfect will. Kingdom Culture family, welcome back to the Kingdom Culture Podcast. This week, I have my friend Esther here. She came all the way from where? Ohio, and I'm in Michigan, so that's like a 5.5 hour drive. So she's awesome for doing that with to come and be on the podcast, and it's just really cool when we get to connect and stuff. And I met her through school, so online, so Zoom and all that stuff. Super cool that you get to meet different people everywhere, right? So it's awesome to have you on, right? And this podcast is actually going to be a little bit different than what you've heard before, because we are both Christian. We love the Lord. And so I wanted to bring on somebody that knew God deeply, and somebody that we could have a fruitful conversation with, right? So my first question: can you share with me your journey of faith and how you came to embrace Christianity?
Yes. Well, just a bit of background to leading to answering that question. So I'm the youngest of 6 kids.
6 kids?
Yes, 1 brother and 5 girls. So that household was very feminine. But my dad embraced all his girls and his son and my mom too. My mom came to the faith when I believe my 3rd oldest sibling was, I just know she was already alive. So that's when my mom came to the faith, and I know I shared it in class one time with our project, actually, that there was a sister from a church. I don't know, I can't recall too much from it. I obviously wasn't born either. But she went around the community, and that was her ministry. So she, would evangelize to the communities and especially to the kids. So my siblings, she would invite them to church. So she would go out of her way. She wasn't married. She didn't have kids. And she would go out of her way, and every Sunday she would pick up my siblings and take them to church. And then so from there, that sparked, the seed. And, my mom, she came to the walk with Christ herself. So it wasn't until then that, she herself became a believer.
So I'm going to pause you for a second. So your mom did not start going to church first. It was your siblings because of this ministry. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. Okay. So that was nice. And then so from then on, my mom, she found the truth. She found peace. She found everything that, she longed for her entire life.
Yeah. So how old were your siblings?
My sister Naomi, since she was the 3rd oldest, she was little. From what I recall, she could have been maybe like 5-ish.
Okay.
Yeah, and then my older siblings, they could have been like 10 or maybe a little older.
How cool is that, though, to think about that your siblings that small? Like, I feel like we dismiss age sometimes when it's like 10, 11, 12. Even with the youth, sometimes we're like 16-year-olds. But that's really cool that your mom saw the fruits in them and like the differences. I'm guessing, like, I could just think about it, and like your household had to be different. Their demeanor had to be different, or maybe they came home and were like, we had this cool experience at church. Like those conversations, and it's really cool to hear about that.
Yeah. So from then on, my mom continued to have more kids. But funny story, I was definitely not planned.
Okay.
I was definitely not planned. My sisters and I, we still joke about it, like I was the oops baby.
Yeah.
Because my mom was just like, no, we're not having any more kids, and then boom, here I am.
Is there a big age difference?
Between me and my older sister, Jessica, she's my best friend, so if I mention her a lot, it's because that's why.
That's cool.
We are a year and 3 months apart.
A year?
Yeah, and 3 months.
Only a year?
Apart. So she was like 3-4 months, and then my mom found out I was coming. So, and I came like a month before my due date, because my mom was like, you were ready to get here.
Take on the world. Yeah.
So from then on, my mom continued to grow in her faith. She even brought one of her sisters also. Cool. And so originally we're from Houston, Texas. And my aunt's still there. Some of her family's still over there.
H-Town.
Yeah.
I have family there too.
Oh, nice.
Love it. Yeah.
So from then on, but my dad, till this day, he's not a believer, but we still hold on to God's promises that one day he will, encounter the Lord and meet him. Nice. And so because of my dad's job, we had to move to Ohio. And I was very young. I was probably like 4 maybe when I moved to Ohio, because my siblings were all in school. So once they finished school, they all officially moved. And then from then on, we started going, my older sisters met the pastor's daughters at their school. So it's still the same church we still go to now. There's different pastors now. So we've been residing at that same church. So basically my entire life. So I was raised in church, and cool. I don't know the world like other people know the world. Has it been tempting? Especially, yes. Especially like, growing up in middle school, having friends that, aren't believers. But I just knew the world wasn't where I was meant to be. Mm-hmm. But yes, my friends still, you wanted to fit in, be cool. And so I would do certain things, but immediately I would always get in trouble. Yeah. So I was just like, Esther, why do you even try? Like, you get caught, you get yourself. Yes. So that would happen. But basically my entire life I have been serving the Lord. I mean, yes, I had seasons where I would just go to church because
you were just like, yeah,
I had to go. My mom was just like, we're going to church. There's no ands, ifs, or buts.
How did that make you feel? Do you feel like it was forced at some point? Do you feel like you were really disconnected at any point of your life?
Oh, for sure. Especially like my middle school age, I was very rebellious. Okay. I was extremely rebellious, and I didn't care how rebellious I was. But I still had the fear of the Lord. Okay. Like my conscience, the Holy Spirit was still there. Like, you shouldn't be doing this. Yeah. And also my mom's voice was just like, you're gonna get in trouble when you go home. Instead of having like the enemy and the Lord, it's just my mom and the Lord. Yeah. It's just like my mom scares me more than Satan. Like, get to know her first.
The enemy don't got nothing
with her. Yeah. So yeah, but definitely during that time, I feel like that was just the time like when I would begin to hear like, you need to find yourself, like know who you are and this and that. And being the youngest of 6, like you're sometimes overlooked. Mm-hmm. Sometimes. But my mom still always had her eyes on me. Yeah. And I would think I could get away with things. Sometimes I could, sometimes I couldn't. I would have some siblings snitch on me. Yeah. So that was fun.
She did this and that.
Yeah. So, but when it came to like the church aspect, I was just going, I knew my friends were there. So it was just like, I'm just going to church right now. But again, my conscience I was still listening. Yeah. I was still listening. The Holy Spirit was still like, you're not living a holy life. And I was little, but still like back then, even the teachings, were still like very strong, but I could comprehend what the word was saying, what like they were preaching, because yes, I grew up in church, but I wasn't reading my scriptures. I wasn't. My mom would be like, read the Bible, and I'm like, no. Like I would just like look at her, but in reality I'd be like, no. Like, why? It's in Spanish. I don't understand. But I did understand. I would understand. But I just recently turned 29, and regardless of all the hardship and adversities and everything that happened in my life till this day, like, I really don't think I would have changed a lot of what happened in my life, because it has all shaped and molded me who I am today. And I don't think my relationship with God would be as strong as it is now if it wasn't for all of those things. Right. So, I mean, there's a few things that I wish I would be like, maybe I didn't have to go through that.
But bring on our own hardship.
Yeah. But other than that, I'm grateful for where God has protected me from it and shown up and placed me.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So how was high school?
High school, like that's when I kind of got like my life together. Like I had a reality check, and it wasn't because like my parents told me something or friends told me something. It was very convicting, and also just because how I saw my older sister Jessica and my sister Gracie.
So you had them as role models?
Yes, because also my other older sisters, I was young when they got married and had kids. So, I mean, we're still very close to even now this day. Now that I'm older, I understand a lot more things. So my sisters are my best friends. Like, I absolutely adore them. But I was very involved in church with those 2 older sisters, and I admired how selfless they were in serving and how God would speak to them and use them. So I think you could probably say it was a jealousy, because I'm like, Lord, what about me? But it's just like, you're not living a righteous life. Right. But it wasn't a jealousy that I envied it, like, oh my gosh, like that I would like hate them or anything. It was just like, Lord, but I do remember that you promised me something. Mm-hmm. Like, where is it? But again, I still wasn't giving the tools in realizing, like, you know, you have to, like, ask for it as well, but you also have to live a good, righteous life.
Right.
Again, that's why we need to read our scriptures to understand and and ask questions. And I think that also comes with, like, you know, my mind goes everywhere when I start talking. I'm sorry.
You're fine.
But even culturally, you know, I was always afraid sometimes to even ask questions. So even at church, I was afraid to ask questions because I'm
like culturally, like just within your denomination, or just
no, like many times when I mean culturally, I mean like my household.
Okay.
So it's not that I was always silenced, but it's just like I was always afraid to ask a question
because I the youngest.
I think so, or I thought I was gonna get in trouble, or I'm like, what if this is a silly question? Or it's just like, so that's why many times, like till this day, like I'm always in my head, like there's always questions here and there, and sometimes like I don't know if that's even a question you can even ask. Like I question my questions, and so that led to that. But again, like I admired my sisters a lot, and I saw how God would use them, and how a lot of people would be like, oh my goodness, they're good girls, and this and that, and I'm just like, here I am being a rebel. And I found that embarrassing. Okay. And I knew that brought shame also to my family.
Okay.
And that was instilled in me very young, because my mother, she was like, when she would lay down the law, she would lay it down.
She said, hey.
Yeah. And that's something that was just instilled in me. And not that she was ashamed of me, but it's just like your actions will have consequences. Mm-hmm. Maybe not now, but further along, there will be consequences. Right. And so from then on, I was just like, in the little even knowledge that I had in high school, I'm just like, Lord, I want to live a life that honors you. I don't know what that's gonna look like. It's gonna take time, but you know, even still then, like they were like, oh, God will do the work, God will do it. So I was just there waiting for God to do the change in me.
Hello.
But it takes effort from one. You have to sacrifice a lot of yourself to see those changes. Right. But again, I wasn't given the right tools at the time. Like I didn't know how to seek that guidance.
Okay.
At that age.
Okay.
And so I was just waiting on God to do the miracle, and I'm just like, okay, here I am.
So at church, you weren't like in a youth group type of situation, or like classes?
We were, but I fully understand Spanish. I understand it. But it was still somewhat a language barrier. Even with like the teachers that we had, there was still information I just wasn't grasping. And again, like because I wasn't fully like transformed, I was still sometimes only going just to see my friends.
Gotcha.
Or just
so you weren't really like paying attention, or like actually trying to digest what was being taught. And you mentioned tools, and that's a very interesting word to me, because we're human. And the Lord has given everybody tools, whether it be for your work, you know, like for me, I got my laptop, I got my cell phone. If I have those two things, those are the tools that I need. I think that, you know, youth today really need, you know, leaders that will be like, this is what happened to me. Here are the tools that I use to actually, like 5 to 10 years later, I figured this out, you know. And this is what helped me, right? So, like, when you talk about tools, you mean, like, somebody sitting down with you and telling you, like, hey, you actually got to go in prayer. You actually have to go, like, deep connection with the Lord to hear his voice, not just ask. I think that that's one of the things that I lacked when I first started my Christian faith, is, like, to listen for the Lord's voice and direction. And it could be hard if you don't, like, you know, do it and, like, try to, like, actually, like, it's like a muscle. I always say, I'm like, my mind's a muscle, my body has muscles, but like your faith, it also has to be worked out, and like your listening ear for God's spirit and like direction has to be worked out. But that's what I thought about when you said tools.
Yeah, so specifically like prayer. They're like, you need to pray, you need to fast. But in reality, I wasn't told why I needed to do it.
Oh, okay.
So I was given tools, but like not really how to use them.
Okay, gotcha.
And like encouraged to read. It was okay. Because there was like a taboo mindset, like, and I don't even know where it came from, but like you couldn't read other books if it wasn't the Bible.
Oh, you grew up like, okay.
Yeah, so it was just like, it was okay to seek other materials, even Christian based that there was, but I didn't know because it wasn't encouraged. It wasn't like, hey, I think this book would help you. it wasn't until like later on in high school that a lot of those materials and things started coming about. And that's what I appreciate about one of my sisters, especially Jessica. She's a big bookworm. Like, she loves to read, and she's actually inspired that in me to read more. So she'd be like, oh, I just read this book, you should read it. But I would be like, I don't like reading. But but then later on, like, you know, I would take her advice. I would, you know, read more scripture and things like that. And there, even at the time, there still wasn't a lot of, at least for me, there wasn't a lot of like books and things that were English based as there is now. Back then, there was probably like just a little bit. And, you know, we would either already read the material or we already knew that stuff. So we were just seeking a lot more. And I should have taken advantage, even though there was a lot of information out in Spanish. I regret not taking advantage of the tools that I did have. But I just put an excuse like, oh, I don't really...
Spanish, I don't vibe with it.
Yeah.
Do you think that's because of the timeline or because of your denomination?
No, I think it was just the timeline.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe it was mainly the timeline of all of those. But I still think I was still reached and saved at a good timing in my life. So because by the end of like high school, I was down to like 2 friends. I had like 2 best friends. Because, you know, you start your freshman year, you know everybody knows you. You have all the friends.
Hallways.
Yeah.
Come to my blocker after second period.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes, not that I was still involved in like with the wrong crowd, but there were still a few influences here and there. And I was seeking such a different change because I still knew that those weren't the right people in my life and all of those things. So I still brought it into prayer. But it wasn't until like senior year that I knew, like, it was like, no, I am a Christian young lady and I'm going to stand firm in like, you know, who God is in my life. I still didn't know him fully and we still have our whole lives to know God because there is just,
yeah. Till he comes or we go.
Yeah. But yeah, so that was basically high school. I wasn't as much of a troublemaker at all like I was.
Was it difficult for you to leave those other friendships?
They slowly just like drifted away.
Okay.
There was one friendship that it did hurt because I carried them like from like middle school. So it was me and my sister, and then these were another set of sisters, like our same age. And so because some personal things got involved, but they didn't really have to do with my sister and I, but still personal things got involved, like we drifted apart. And I think that was one that hurt because we were ministering to them, we were taking them to church, they were having encounters, and because, you know, someone that wasn't a good influence came in and like that drifted apart. So in that aspect, that did hurt. That did hurt. But other friendships, they just slowly drifted away, and it honestly didn't bother me, or I didn't notice it right away. So I thank God for that, because
isn't it funny how he does that? He's just kind of like, oh cool, you're surrendering this.
Yeah. Or he'll bring something else to not really notice, that they're drifting.
Let me just replace this with this, and you're good. Like, but it takes maturity too, and like faith to like, I don't know. I think that with me, I did notice when somebody was like off, or like I was losing things, but I already knew that I was not going to continue the life that I had, because if I did, I wouldn't be here. Yeah. And so every time that somebody showed me like, hey, no, we can't continue on with our, relationships or whatever, our friendships, I'm just like, I love you, but I need you to understand, like, this is different. I need to change. And with influences, like they always say, like, just in life, or like self-development, you are like the 5 people you hang around with the most.
Yeah. And so like came senior year, that's when, like, because my heart desired to have all of those changes, that's when like my leadership began.
Cool.
Especially with our organization with AHEC. My older sisters were always involved, so I was always there helping them, like, what do you need help in? I always loved being with them. So it's just like, Gracie, what do you need? Like, where do you need me? Like, I'll do it. So you would always see me like behind them all the time. And so, but yeah, officially, like my senior year, that's when like my leadership started taking off basically, and I said yes to the Lord, because there was also times that I would say no to the Lord because I was afraid, I was shy, I was timid, I was just like, I'm not good enough, like I'm a sinner, like no, Lord, not me. Because
pick somebody else off the bench, please.
Yeah, because I would compare myself a lot to other people. Because I felt like I wasn't spiritually at their level, or like their posture was just always, high. And I was just like, Lord, I'm not like that. Like, you can't possibly use me. But then, God would speak prophetic words over me, and even my sisters, and with like us together. So I would hold on to that. And I was just like, okay, Lord, like you promised me that. So that means you're going to be with me every step of the way. So I'll say yes. Yeah. I'll say yes. And from then on, it's been nonstop.
Cool. And that actually leads me to my next question. So how do you balance your faith with the demands of modern life, with our fast-paced environments that we live in today?
I think it's just being secure in your relationship with God and your faith in who He is in your life. Not allowing those, like, the worldly things to infiltrate into your life and to manipulate your thoughts and your faith. Because when you know who God is in your life, and not only just reading about Him in scripture, but I have been able to experience that same God that did miracles for other people in scriptures and for the world. Like, He's been able to do that for me.
Praise.
And because He has, like, there is nothing that this world can offer that will ever change that. Like, absolutely nothing. Like, so cool. I've gone through so much just being in His walk, in His way, not even in the world. And I'm like, I can't imagine how my life would be without Him, nor do I want to imagine it.
Yeah.
And especially even now, with so many things rising when it comes to, your identity, they're attacking just little kids with confusing them in their identity and who they are. And that's why, like, the home ministry is the most important one. God calls the ministry of the home, like, as being the very first one, being important. So all of the teachings begin from the home. The church is just to give you more tools. And there's still, unfortunately, there's still families or even a whole generation that are just relying on the church to raise their kids in that aspect. And that's where us knowing, we grew up that way, but we got it together, and we know, like, the importance of, the teachings from home. Like, we're also responsible in teaching this other generation. Like, no, you as the parent also have to set that foundation for your family, for your kids, for yourself. If you don't know who Christ is, you personally, like,
how are you going to teach it to somebody else? You know? And that's really real, because I remember when I was pregnant with AB, I'm like, Lord, I was scared. I was like, Lord, like, I come from the world, and, the enemy truly, like you said, I liked how you pointed out thoughts, because that is the only thing that he can attack. And the Bible says that, right? And it's like, I constantly had to reframe my thinking of my self-worth and my identity and the things that I was losing, and fill it with the truth of the Lord. So when I was pregnant with AB, I'm like, Lord Jesus, like, give me the wisdom, give me the strength. Like, I grew up with church hurt. I shared with you, like, how I grew up in two different denominations, and, like, how there was, like, fights there, and, like, my grandmother stopped talking to me just because of religion, right? So that, like, she raised me when I was little. So having her just be mad at me because I had a party when I was 15 was crazy to me. So I grew up with a lot of, like, church hurt and everything else. And I'm like, God, I want AB to see, my son's name is AB. I want AB to see you, not because I tell him, hey, you gotta follow Jesus, but because he can see your love, your goodness, your kindness in me, and I am reflecting that to him. And since he was born, I be worshiping here. We pray, like, we pray together. I pray over him, and it's just so beautiful what the Lord does and shows us in spirit when we actually are intentional. And we are allowing ourselves to be vulnerable with our kids, because, we're the grown-ups. We're going to have it together, but, like, being vulnerable with them and telling them, like, hey, I actually get my strength from God is very important. Because, you know, I think in Hispanic households and like single mom households, we praise them. They're like, dude, you did it by yourself. You are the bomb. Like, I owe you everything. But like, you know, how many times were they up stressing? How many times were they up like trying to calculate like how are they going to make it to the next month? Like, I think about all that stuff now that I'm a mom, not because I'm struggling or whatever, but I'm like, I'm a mom, and I make sure, because those are thoughts that I'm like, I'm making sure that he has all of the tools. I'm making sure that I am the good role model, because everything that he's going to learn is from me and my husband, obviously, right? So that's a really good point. And it's cool because I think the churches are more open to that now. Like I've heard stories, because I didn't grow up in church, but I've heard stories of like people saying like, oh yeah, we couldn't miss one culto, like, or we would be put in disciplina, or like they would go knock at the doors, and I'm like, what if you were sick? What if you know, what about your humanity? What about if you just, you know, were like sad or something was going on that was just too much? They're like, they didn't care. They just would like go look for you or like call you. Why were you at church today? Was that like that?
Yeah. I was little, but I grew up in that rajatabla era. Like, I grew up in that era, and there was times, like, in my niñez, I still recall when pastors would put people in disciplina, like, from the altar.
From the altar?
Yeah, and I was little, but I remember that, like, vividly. And even sleeping underneath the banca, I would watch. I was very observant.
Yeah.
So when the older generation, they're like, oh, I remember this and that, like I still got a glimpse of that. I still got to live some of that.
Okay. So
yeah, there was a lot of those things, but a lot of that just came from, I felt like, dogmas and tradition. It wasn't Christ-based the way the way that they approach those things.
Right.
I mean, I did appreciate, like, you know, like, oh, I didn't see you at church, and they would call you up. Now sometimes, like, a couple weeks, and you're just like, you don't really hear from anyone. Because again, people are just so caught up in life and to themselves that sometimes we forget to reach out. We forget to reach out. But that's like the one thing that I did admire from like back in the day. Like they would be like, oh, I didn't see you at church, like, where you at? But they were, like you said, like sometimes they would just want to catch up, just be like, why weren't you there? Like, get to church. Not really like, oh, you're not well. Okay? Yeah. There was a few that came with good intentions, but the majority was just like, why did you miss church?
Get back in it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And like, just side in parentheses, growing up in the church in Texas, like there was service 7 days a week.
Huh? 7 days a week?
Yeah. We didn't. If my mom could make it all 7, she would take all of us.
Let's go.
And thank her that my dad was just like, no, they gotta go to school. So yes, my mom was very present. My dad was present in our lives, but my mom, she's the one that raised us in church and things like that. But no, yeah.
She's a faith-based woman, man. She loved prayer. That's awesome, though.
Yeah, that's
and like if you think about it, though, I feel like because I grew up as Jehovah's Witness, so like we had 5. Yeah, so we had Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, 4. And Saturdays we'd have to go knock on doors, like that's real, and preach and evangelize, and that was scary. But you know, I think that grew me as a people person. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I remember I could not hang out with people outside of my religion. Yeah. And my aunt actually got kicked out because she married outside of it. And I'm just like, this is real? Like, this is real. Like, you cannot marry outside of your religion and you cannot hang out with people. So, like, I was a church kid, like, growing up and everything else. So I have that small part, but then I moved with my mom and, like, kind of, like, you know, she stopped going to church, like, constantly because, you know, she had a little, like, fight with the church herself, and then she kind of was like, you don't need to go. You know, you have a relationship with Jesus, like with God or whatever. You don't need to go, and it's okay. We'll just do our thing here at home. So I grew up with both of those things of like very like hardcore and then very laid back.
Oh, I see.
And then I just stopped caring altogether, right? So that's great. Yeah, it's great to know though that people actually grew up with.
So that's where, like, a lot of just, like, I think we talked about it in class one time, but, like, that's where a lot of, like, the church hurt just comes from, just because a lot of it was just a lot of rules.
Yeah.
And usually no explanation to why.
Right.
So, but I'm glad even with those rules, like, you know, God still protected me, like, you know, and my family. And I'm grateful for my mom that she just, regardless of what was happening in life, she's like, we're still going to church regardless of what happens, regardless of what it is. And I'd be dragging because I'm just like, no. But no, my mom was just like, no.
And that's really cool, though. I feel like I admire that too. Like today, if there is, you know, and even when I first started, I was in church. Like when I first came to Christianity and I gave my life to Christ, I was in church. Like, you had Thursdays, cool, I'm there. Tuesdays, oh, I'm there too. Oh, you got a little group of like, you know, a book teaching kind of thing. I'm there. Fridays, cool. Boom. Saturday, we have a worship night coming. I'm there. I was there like clockwork. But because I loved being in the presence of the Lord, and it was something that my heart had desired for so long. And it's just a community of like the people around you and like how you can see the love of like, you know, because I didn't grow up with that. I grew up alone. My mom was working all the time, and that's because she had to. And my older siblings, you know, we didn't really get along. So it was just like, you know, my one sibling that we did get along moved out, and it was just me and my other ones, and I'm just like, so what am I gonna do now? Cool. And it was just me, like in school or whatever, like, but I don't know, something about community and having people that actually care and like giving you those phone calls and being like, hey, where you at? Like, you're very active. Like, are you okay? You know, like, and so I had that. And I talk about the faith family that the Lord gave me right away. So when I came to Christ, I met them because I wanted to join the choir. Okay. So, that's how I met them. So the first person that I met from that family, they're a whole family. So he was a brother. He's the uncle of my best friend. He was the worship leader. And I'm like, okay, cool. You know, how do we do this? Oh, you got to audition. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. You know, I grew up in choir in school. So I'm like, cool. I got this. I was like, all right. And so I did it. You need a what? A soprano? I got it. But I got into the choir like on the background because, you know, it takes time, you know, you have to do all that stuff. And then from that, they launched a prayer night group every Tuesday. And every Tuesday we would either show up at somebody's house, or we would show up at our church, or we showed up at the Boys and Girls Club building, and we would just be in community. And like we would have 5 people show up one night and 10 people show up the one night and then 30 people, but it was just all spirit led, and it was beautiful, right? And so from there I developed friendships. My friend's mom, like her and I are like besties because she gives me so much marriage advice and like calms me down. I'm like, that's my faith family right there, you know. And the people from my church are my faith family as well, but it was just something deeper, like the whole family sense, the way that, you know, they portray, and like the way that Jazz grew up, like her name's Jaslyn, the way that she grew up, and like how I can see how her parents' seeds are like, you know, the decisions that she's made now, and like it's so important. Like again, the home, like that's the important part of it. And I'm like, I didn't have that, and I'm going to create that now for my son. And it's like the cool thing about our community is like, yeah, there could be hardships and there could be like people like bugging you and stuff, but it's like out of good heart. And if it's not, then the Lord will give you discernment and be like, yeah, I get you. Thank you for, you know, you got to be respectful too. You can't be like, leave me alone. But a lot of that has been changing. And I remember in class, one of our teachers said, like, yeah, you know, you tell the people that, you know, we're going to have 3 cultos and they freak out or they don't want to show up. Right? Like, that was real too. So it's like, how can we find a medium now for the youth, for the next generations of like, hey, I know I told you Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, but Tuesday and you know, Tuesday's going to be prayer. Thursday's probably going to be like our class, and Friday we could do something like, I don't know, like a gathering or something. But we are still teaching, right? We are still installing faith and talking about Christ and like making it different and making a different thing, so it doesn't feel like it's heavy or forced, you know. And I think that goes a long way, because even today I'm just like, cool, gotta be at church 5 days a week. I'm gonna be there. I'm gonna be dragging my son, and he's not comfortable, but we're gonna be there, you know. And it's just, I don't want to lose that. That's one thing that I personally in my household do not want to lose. But I know a lot of people like struggle with that right now too, right? Because life happens. Life is crazy right now. All right. So, can you recall a specific moment of adversity where your faith was tested, and how did you overcome it?
That's a good question. That takes me to, you could per se, a season in my life that I didn't always suffer from anxiety. Okay. But then that started to develop, let's say 2017. And I never really experienced anxiety, so I didn't know what it was. Mm-hmm. So I did go through a lot of anxious moments, anxious days, like weeks, months, even that whole 2018, that year. It was just, I was very depressed. I was very depressed and very anxious. And during that time, especially like the beginning months of it all, it affected me really bad. Like within less than 2 months, I dropped like 40 pounds. Not healthy at all. Mm-hmm. And so that brought a lot of alarms to my family. But I didn't know that was affecting me in like my physical appearance, because I couldn't even like look at myself in the mirror. And it wasn't until like it started alarming my family that I was like, wait, whoa, something's going on. Mm-hmm. So during that time, I was questioning my faith, because again, I've heard of anxiety and depression, but you're just like, you kind of like shrug it off because you don't really think you're going to go through something like that. Yeah. So I didn't really know the signs. I didn't really know the feelings. But there would be mornings that I would wake up just weeping, like just crying, and I would be angry. I would be so angry, and I would question God. I'm like, God, why am I feeling like this? Like, what did I do? Like, I would question everything. Oh, wow. I'm like, did I do something wrong? Like what's going on? Is this a sign? Like, am I gonna die? Like, I would question like if I was gonna die, because then I did realize, the effect that it was taking on me. And I'm like, am I sick? Like, am I gonna, like, is this a punishment? Like what's going on?
A punishment? Is that what you felt?
Like, yes, because I just didn't understand. And many times, like, certain things, sometimes God warns you of things that are coming, but sometimes he doesn't. Yeah. And you just have to embrace it. But I was just questioning everything, and it was going like that for months, and I just felt like I didn't feel the Lord's presence. So I would like, I know I didn't do anything wrong, so I would be angry. I would question everything. I was constantly just crying and emotional, and I'm like, God, this isn't fair. Like, why aren't you talking to me? Why aren't you saving me from this? Like, what's going on? So there was a while that I was angry. Mm-hmm. I was just plain out angry because I didn't understand why I was experiencing those emotions, those feelings, those thoughts. Like, our mind is a very powerful tool, and it can get dangerous in there. Mm-hmm. It can get very dangerous. And I found myself in a dangerous place. And I'm like, but I knew, and I'm like, God, I know I shouldn't be here. Like, mentally, I shouldn't be here. So I don't understand why this is happening. So I was so angry at a point that I wasn't even talking to God. Because I'm like, you're allowing me to suffer like this, and you're not even gonna help. Like, I was talking to him, and I'm like, because he says he's our friend, so I was just like, you're not even gonna help me? Like, I was just so angry. But like, when you think about it now, I'm like, actually, you're kind of ridiculous. But then it just got me, like, months after, I went on a mission trip. Even being like that, I still went on a mission trip because I was still holding on to God's promises, because I'm like, no, I'm like, God, you are not a God that's just gonna abandon me like this. Yeah. Like, you're not. Yeah. And on this trip, I actually had a mentor at the time, and she helped me out so much through the process, and she's actually now a pastora in the Philippines. That's where we went. Yeah. And she just holds like a special place in my heart. She always will. Yeah. And when we were out there, she just has such a grace to speak with people and just to get it all out. And from then on, we just started having a conversation, and like that led me back to like months before. So all of that happened like towards the end of 2017. Like when all those changes started to happen and this and that. And it just took me back to like the beginning of that year though. God did give me a word, but it didn't make sense at the time to me. He was just like, you're going to go through something that you're not going to understand. But for me, I was just like, okay, like I'll eventually get it, Lord. Like, that's how we are.
You'll leave me.
Yeah. But I had forgotten about it. Like I put it away, and because like I didn't see anything happen right away per se, I was just like, it's probably just a word. Because sometimes God will give us a word, but it won't come to fulfillment years later. Right. So I just, like I put it in my back pocket, and that's where I left it. And it wasn't until we were on this trip, and I'm like it was just like, I was just like, God did give me a word. He did warn me about this. And so we continued on our conversation and talking with her, like everything just, it was like there was a weight lifted off. And it was just like, God was just like, you're going to go through this process, but you're going to understand why later.
Yeah.
And that was I went on that trip 2018. Yeah, like 6 years ago in March. I think I went in March.
Time flies.
Yes, and it's now 2024. And I have seen that, by me going through what I had to go through in those difficult moments, I've been able to help other people. So, because many times we forget that when we ask God to be vessels, like, especially like how I grew up, being that vessel was just always on the altar with the microphone. Like, I'm going to be a preacher, a teacher, a pastor, an evangelist, a missionary, and then, that's it. But, those are the only categories I grew up with. And so many times when we tell God, because I remember I told God, especially like in that high school age, time frame where I told you that, I wanted to change my life. And I'm like, God, use me however you want. And, we say that, and then we're just like, okay, Lord. But if that's how God wanted to use me, that my life literally had to fall apart, and then for him to restore me, to know that I couldn't save myself, heal myself, he had to.
Yeah, that's good.
And for me to be able to help someone out years later, then yes, Lord, use me again. Like, if that's what it takes, because if I had to go through all of that, and I was able to reach at least one soul for Christ, for me, that was all worth it. Amen. For me, that was all worth it. But yes, during that time, it was very difficult. It was very sad because I was even going through personal things.
That's amazing that you still remained with God, because I think that when we go through hardship, we do get into this mindset of like, well, God, you're not telling me anything, so bye, right? And I think it comes with our humanity. But it's so cool to hear that you actually went on a missions trip and like went and seeked God, because I think that you knew like your foundation in God is so strong that you're like, nope, there's no way he's just gonna leave me here. There's no way this is where I'm gonna end up, and it's amazing how you keep your perspective of bringing people to God, because that could be a scary thing too, right? To be vulnerable and be like, oh, I get you, but do you know about, I'm going to tell you about my best friend, Jesus. Like, like that could be hard, because a lot of people are very, very closed now to hearing about Jesus or hearing about any type of whatever, and it's like, nope, I got it. I feel like a lot of us are strong in the sense of like, I'm emotionally intelligent, I'm emotionally strong, I got it. There's nothing that, I need help with or whatever, but that's amazing, and praise God that, you can now say that testimony and help other people with it, because that's something that I recently heard too, that one of my youth kids actually told me. She goes, every time I go through something bad, something that I feel like is going to knock me down or take me out, she said, I just keep telling myself, this is for a testimony. This is for a testimony. And like that touched me so much, where I was just like, yes, girl, like good for you. Like that's so true. I forgot about that too. Yeah. Where our hardships are not for only molding us or making us surrender, but for other people to be fed as well, right? Because how else would how else would God work? Like, I understand you. I know what you're going through. Let me help you with it, right? Yeah. So cool. So another question that I have for you is, how would you prepare for marriage in your season of singleness or dating in your life?
I think it's also asking, not also, but it's asking yourself, like you as an individual. Maybe you can even answer this yourself, Abid, since you're married.
I am married, yes.
Like asking yourself, like, am I ready for this? Mm-hmm. Because sometimes I have seen relationships, you know, they're dating and then they just fall into marriage, and then like months later, years later, they're like, I wasn't ready, or you know, I should have waited. Like, honestly, they have regrets. And or they'll give me advice. They're like, don't do it, or just like enjoy your singleness and this and that. And I'm just like, that's coming from a place of regret.
Yeah.
Because I have also heard even from people like very, very close to me. They're like, if it was up to me, I wouldn't have never gotten married. Like, you know, I wouldn't. You know, I wouldn't. And I'm just like, but what about your kids? Like, you have kids now. And they're like, no, if I would have known all of this was going to happen. And right now they're not like spiritually sound. Like, they're not in the walks of the Lord any longer. But they were like, no, if I would have known, I wouldn't have done it. And that answer didn't settle well with me. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, no, I was like, Lord, I'm not accepting this excuse, this answer from this person. Yeah. Because your word says differently. Right. Marriage is something that you created. You have called us to be fruitful and multiply. You have called us to be, the head of the household, you know, the male and even the wife. You have called us to be ministers of our homes and to lead our families closer to you, and that will bring others. And I'm like, so that answer does not settle well with me. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, and I hope that this person doesn't continue to, you know, spread that to others, and, you know, pouring into like that's very selfish. Yeah. That's a very selfish mindset. And I'm not trying to sound either like very spiritual, like I'm not, but I have seen, because, you know, growing up with just my mother leading us, you know, in the walks of Christ, you know, not my dad, but if God grants me that privilege of having my own family one day in my marriage, you know, that's what I desire. I desire what Scripture has said that we are to seek for. Yeah. And so, you know, our singleness is a beautiful time to prepare for that. Mm-hmm. You know, because if you were to ask me right now, like, Esther, are you ready to get married? I would say yes. Okay. And it's not that I just use my singleness just to prepare myself for that. Not only that, but it's just like, Lord, you know how much I desire to have my own family and my home to serve you, because I didn't grow up with that, but I've seen how beautiful it can be. Mm-hmm. So I desire that. Yeah. But I'm preparing myself to, you know, you're not a wife when, you know, your husband proposed to you, or like when you finally got married. You have to have the posture of a wife. Mm-hmm. You have to be ready, because what does Scripture say? He who finds a good thing, he who finds a wife finds a good thing. Yeah. But it's not like, oh, I found you, you're a wife now. Yeah. No, like, you have to have the characteristics, the posture, the mindset, the desire to be a wife, not just simply just to say you're a wife, but are you willing to sacrifice now yourself to be the wife, to be, you know, esa ama de casa, to sacrifice for your husband, for your kids? Is that something that you're ready for? Or you just want the Instagram picture, like, I have a husband, I have a kids, I have a home. Yeah. Like, where are the intentions coming from? If that's what you want, just know that's not going to last. Right. If you want it for the wrong intentions. But if you want it for the right intentions, what God has called it to be, then I believe it's going to flourish. Right. But it's preparing myself, you know, continuing to read the Scriptures, again, not just simply just to be a wife, but I desire to be a strong woman. Mm-hmm. in whatever aspect God, you know, is continuing to guide me on. I was gonna say something else, but literally my mind just it tends to like go elsewhere sometimes when I'm talking. But yeah, it's just preparing yourself, and, you know, if you're ready to sacrifice, you know, your singleness. Mm-hmm. Because the culture has also brought across, you know, like, it's all about you. Mm-hmm. It's all about you, but love is about sacrifice, and we see that greatest example in Jesus.
Right.
You know, love, when you love someone, it doesn't always feel good.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure when Jesus was crucified on that cross, it didn't feel good, but he did it out of love, out of sacrifice.
Right.
So you also have to examine yourself. Am I ready? Like, when I say that I love you, it has to come from an action.
Right.
It can't just come from words.
Right.
You know, like, you can say I love you to as many people as you want, but
when there's conflict, are you going to show up? When there's conflict, are you going to be the graceful person that the Lord has called you to? When there's conflict, are you going to be like, not look at you, not look at the other person and see who's in the wrong, but see Christ in the middle? Yeah. That's what I've learned with my marriage and throughout, you know, just faith as a whole. Like, I don't know if you know who the Perrys are, but they had a podcast that I was listening to, and it was very interesting because they focused on legacy. They focused on, you know, the enemy trying to take the greatest covenant the Lord has created, because even us, the church, we are Jesus' bride, right? Like, that's how he calls us. And it's like the enemy's out here to kill, destroy, and take everything from marriages, and he targets them so much because he hates marriage. And he hates God so much that he doesn't want to have his image be reproduced through our legacies, through our family trees, right? So, like, it was just really cool to hear it that way, because I had never heard it. Like, I had never thought of, like, oh, hey, so, you know, and Sammy and I are very, like, graceful with each other. So, like, if we were to separate, it'd probably be, like, co-parenting at the best or whatever. But, like, that damages the covenant. That damages AB's ministry, because he's going to grow up separated. You know, when he was once in a household that was full of grace, and, you know, it's not easy. Marriage is not easy. Let me tell you, because it's not a walk in the park. You're marrying your best friend. Like, there's this image of, like, oh, you found your best friend, you're gonna get married, everything's gonna be awesome. No, when there's conflict, that's when you need to go and seek the Lord in prayer, and, like you said, surrender. Because Latinos, we got this little spice to us, this little pride going on sometimes, you know, and it's like, but you were wrong for that. But instead of, like, looking at each other for the wrong, where can we look and seek for God to glorify himself in our conflict? Where can I, you know, develop a better communication skill with my husband so that we can actually come to conclusion and resolve it? And at the end of the day, we're just looking at Christ. We're not looking at, like, what she did, he did, right? And I think that's what's developed within my marriage. But if I was single and I was preparing, like you said, I think I'd be focused on, you know, like you said, like myself, like, okay, what are my non-negotiables? Because you also are a person, right? You are a person of yourself. You have your own ministry, you'll have your own thing going on outside of you being a wife and a mother. And that's something that I've learned too. So it's like, what are your non-negotiables? Not in the sense of, like, no, I have to do this, so, you know, no, you're gonna do everything. Always think about oneness. That's the one thing that I've learned. It's like, it doesn't matter. It's all about becoming one, because that's what God calls us to, right? But also, you know, what are some things that you want to do, you know, within your marriage, together or not together? Like, what are the ministries that, you know, the Lord has already given you without your other person? You know, and how can you flourish in that and learn to be as fruitful as you can, so that when you are married and in a home, like, because it's two different people, like, two different backgrounds, two different everything, two different, I mean, my husband's Puerto Rican, I'm Mexican, it's two different worlds, you know, so we've had to learn, like, oh, so that's what that word means, or like, oh, hey, okay, I don't like the way that, you know, sometimes this comes out, and they're like, oh, it's just my voice, or like those types of things, you know, because there's a lot of humanity that gets dismissed, I think, as Christians too, because you're like, no, just look at the Lord, just go back to the Lord. I'm like, yeah, but we're human, you know, so, like, preparing to, you know, and when you're dating too, like, when you're dating, the point of dating is to get to know your other person, to get to know, like, okay, cool, you're the one, and pray it together, and pray about it, and pray for a timeline. Like, I think that's super cool when people do that, like a timeline, like, ask the guy, like, okay, is it now? Is it tomorrow? When is it? You know? Yeah. And so those are little things that you can actually also do. It might sound a little corny to some people, like, why would I do that?
Yeah.
But if we have a close knit best friend relationship with Jesus, I think it comes out natural. Like, I gotta pray about this. Yeah. I gotta pray. Should I go on this date, God? You know. So that's what I've learned through all of that. But that's good input, though.
Yeah, to piggyback off on that, I think also the beautiful thing about dating also is also dating with intention. And so when one also has to examine themselves also in their singleness before they enter a relationship. It's like, am I mentally ready for this? Am I financially stable for this as well? Yeah. Like, you have to examine every aspect of your life if you're ready to enter that. And I think also when you're dating, a person's relationship with God will be evidence. And if in your singleness, like even before anybody else comes into the picture, if you are faithful to God, I believe you can be faithful to your significant other. Yeah. Because our relationship with God is the essence of our being. Like, our life has to revolve around Him. It's not Him like around us. So if I am able to submit to Christ, I am able to submit to my husband if he is worthy to be submitted to. If he can submit himself to Christ, because he is the one that's going to be leading me and our family. Right. Not in like a masculine, like dominant way, but it's just like if he himself is able to surrender his pride, because men are built differently. Men are built differently, and they always got to be the tough guys. But when a man is able to be vulnerable and emotional in the presence of the Lord, that means I can see that he is surrendering his pride, his everything, and willing to hear God's voice on where he's going to be directed. If he can easily submit to Christ, you can blindfold me, I will walk by you wherever we gotta go. Yes. No. So, but if you see that the person that you are interested, if they are faithful to God, I don't think there's anything to really worry about. Yes, things are still going to come up in a marriage. I know that. I've seen it. I've heard it. Gone to all the conferences. But regardless, like, it's also every marriage is different. But the closer you are to God, I think just those other things will be easier to manage. Again, I'm not there yet, but I'm faithful and hopeful, because if I can come to Christ, with all of my doubts and my issues and everything, and trusting in him, it just makes life easier. And if the two are going in the same direction, if God is the center of my life, in your singleness, when you were single, and now when like you're married, it's gonna flourish differently. So I think everyone, even if when you're not single, even when you're with someone, Christ should still be the center of your life. Like, if he's not pulling his end, evaluate that. Take that into consideration. If he's calling you out, like, hey, are you reading your Bible? Are you praying? Like, I would see that as a good thing. Like, he's paying attention to those things. But if he's also showing fruit that he's leading you, closer to God, that's an even more beautiful thing. So it's paying attention to all of those things, and just not even in your singleness, but even when you're with someone, continue to prepare yourself, hold yourself accountable for those things. Because if you want to be that righteous man, that righteous woman, you have to hold your end of the bargain, and not lose sight of who God is in your life. Right. Because no man is going to save you, no woman is going to save you.
Correct. And it's like, don't put anybody in a pedestal. Yeah. Because no matter how much you love somebody, they're still human, and they're going to let you down. Like, and the beautiful thing about God is like, but I will show up in his weakness or her weakness, and together you can decide if you're gonna work through it, and hang on to the Lord and really seek his guidance and presence, or choose the one thing that we never want to say, right? Because sometimes it can get hard to like come together. I've had people say like, we tried everything but it just didn't work, and that's sad. But it does happen. But God still glorifies himself in those situations. And it's just very it's something that we need to start focusing more on, because it's like, oh, you know, a household, kids. Having a kid is a lot. Having a kid is a lot of responsibility, and it's not just, you know, oh, he's here, we're gonna play, I'm gonna teach him to read, write, and whatever. No, you have to be feeding into them who Christ is every single day and every single moment. Oh shoot, they dropped something. Where's your patience?
Yeah.
Right? Where's your love? Are you making sure that you have a posture of Christ with them? It doesn't matter if they're 2 or 3. Where's your fruit? Right? So it's like all of these different dynamics, and the more that you think about it, and like, what kind of mom do you want to be?
Yeah.
You know, what do you want to teach them? What are the things that you don't want them to go through that you went through? What are some things that you want to instill in them young, so that, you know, they grow up to be better and better than you? Like, that's what I think about every day. I'm like, all right, so I went through a lot of heartbreak. I'm praying that my son doesn't have a girlfriend until he's 26, right? That's just me. Oh my God. You know? But it's like, you know, the more that you think about those things and you examine what kind of life or future you want to have with God, the more beautiful it is, because you bring it to prayer and you get to hear God say, but what about this? Or like, okay, yep, we could do that way. And it's just so cool. And, you know, that's why I brought that question. But marriage is beautiful, tricky in all of its ways, but it's so cool to just know that it was created for companionship, intimacy, love, acceptance. And it just shows who God is for us, right? Because it's just amazing. Like, I don't know, marriage. Woo! I'm about to get married. I'm just kidding. Well, thank you so much for your conversation. I do have one more, and the last question is, so we're Hispanic, and with that comes other things. So how do you know, take your faith and make sure that it's well balanced within your Hispanic communities, and the way that you just live your life in those aspects?
I feel like that question like can lead in so many different ways. But like when I hearing you say it takes me like, especially I feel like with Hispanics, like I feel like we fall a lot into tradition, and I feel like that has even infiltrated in like your Christian like walk with the Lord. Like if it's tradition, then it's the right thing, but in reality, it's not.
Right.
It's not always the right thing. Only because it's tradition doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, or it doesn't mean like we don't always have to fall into tradition. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, for example, I feel like there's like a rule, especially like with Hispanic young ladies, like you can't leave your house until you're married. And for some parents, it's like it doesn't matter how old you are, you're not leaving the home. But again, that's more tradition, and I have seen it even like in the church community, like when there has been some bold, you know, young men and women that, you know,
stepped outside of the box.
And they end up moving out. Growing up, that was very like frowned upon. They're like, oh my gosh, you're leaving? Like they're gonna, like the first thing is like they're gonna sin, like you know, they're gonna stray away from the Lord, they're gonna be in the world, and all this and that. And I'm just like, that's not always gonna happen. I also think like it also depends on the individual's maturity. Like if the parents like no, my child is mature enough that they can move out. There's some people that do not mature until like they're 30. There's some that are mature like when they're 17 and they can literally survive on their own. And there's still some 30-year-old babies that they can't.
Need prayer, right?
Yeah. And so I think that's just a big one. And I just feel like that needs to also be a conversation brought up. Again, that's just my perspective, especially in the walks of the Lord, like in church and stuff like that. Like if your child wants to move out, I think you should hear them out. I think you as a parent, you know your child, you know who you've raised, and if you believe that they're mature enough to move out, I think you should give them that esa confianza to do so. If you know that they are, you know, faith-based and spiritually sound, then let them go. Because also scripture says, like, you can, if you're old enough and like in a household, like when you're grown and your parents are also grown, like that's a lot of different opinions. That's a lot of different, like, you're bumping heads because you're grown and you kind of already have yourself, like, you're kind of set in your ways to a certain extent. And also scripture says, you know, parents, it's I can't always quote scripture correctly, but you know, like where it says like like parents, like, don't, oh my goodness.
Are you talking about the verse where it talks about how children should be with their parents and their parents should be with their kids?
No, not that one. Like, you know, don't provoke your children. Oh, okay. And children don't provoke your parents. Right. But I think when you get to a certain age, like, you're just provoking each other because you're always bumping heads. And for you to have a beautiful, like, family dynamic still, I think, you know, you should allow your child to move out if that's, you know, what they're seeking. But if that's not what they're seeking, maybe you need to encourage them to move out. Like, if they're grown enough and can take care of themselves, be like, hey, it's time for you. Like, you know, you're not sinning by moving out. Yeah. You're not. In my eyes, you're not. And I genuinely don't think you are. But because it's tradition, they have held on to that. And I'm pretty sure many other things within the church and within culture, but even like Hispanic men are just so, I feel like there's always a wall. Yeah. And like they don't tune into their emotions many times. And that's also infiltrates. Like I can see it in the church community. Like, you know, when dads don't show love to their children, especially their boys, that breaks my heart. Right. And I'm like, it's okay to be vulnerable in front of them. Yeah. But because they were raised in a generation like men don't cry, men have to be tough, men only provide, and this and that, that you're not allowing your children to experience that vulnerability even with you. Right. If they can't really see you do, I'm not saying like always crying in front of your kids, you gotta get it together at some point or at some moments, but they need to be able to see that it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to cry, it's okay to seek for help. And especially if they see you seeking, you know, for help in God's presence. Right. And I think that's where they should experience it more, in seeing you in God's presence than anything else. And I just feel like because they have a wall up, because that's the way, like, it's in the culture, embedded in the culture, and that infiltrates, you know, I see it at church. And I'm like, I just wish men were just a bit more vulnerable within the church. Some are, sometimes some are too vulnerable. And I'm just like, okay, buddy. But I just think that needs to get better. Right. So for it to get better, it needs to be spoken about. Right. And men need to, you know, be willing to bring that wall down and see how important it is for your children to see vulnerability, to see love and affection and all those things. Right. But because a certain generation was just wired differently, it's still affecting these coming generations, especially even ours. Yeah. We saw that a lot. We grew up with that. So I came to realization, like with my parents, like they loved me as best as they could. Yeah. They love me with their entire lives. Yeah. They do, but they love me as best as they could, and I can't hold that against them anymore. Right. I used to. Oh, okay. Because I'm a very affectionate person. Yeah. Like I'm a very touchy, like physical touch is one of my like high love languages. Yeah. Like we could probably say nothing, but if I'm touching you, like, or just in your presence, like I'm satisfied. I'm okay with that. Yeah. But my parents aren't really affectionate. They're not too much. Like I'm always, every morning and every time I go to bed, I need a hug and a kiss. Like, and I'm good. I'm set for the day. And you know, I'm always seeking that physical touch. Yeah. But because I was always seeking that and I didn't really receive it, I interpreted that they didn't love me growing up. Mm-hmm. So that's, you know, that what led to my rebellious. That's what led to, you know, other things that I wish that didn't lead to that. But I didn't know that, you know, just my parents weren't showered with a lot of love and affection. Mm-hmm. So they gave me as much as they possibly can, and I can't hold that against them. Right. So I had to learn to forgive without them ever having to be like, hey, I'm sorry, I'm not affectionate enough. Yeah. So that also took a lot from me. Wow. So I'm like, I know my parents would give their life for me. That I know. Mm-hmm. Like my parents would give their life for any of their kids. And till this day, they will sacrifice anything for us. Mm-hmm. But again, a lot of their love just wasn't interpreted the way I was expecting it. But it took a lot of years and a lot of understanding to see, like, no, my parents do love me. They really do. It's just I was expecting it the way other people received it, or the way I wanted to receive it. So I just showed them love the way, as much as I can too, because that's what I learned. But I became very affectionate. Like, out of all 6, I think I'm the most affectionate one. Like, you can ask any of my sisters. Like, I'm always hugging them. My nephews, I have 9 nieces and nephews. I'm always hugging and kissing, and they're like, Tia, like, that's enough. Like, especially there's one that I fight with him all the time because I'm like, give me a kiss, and he's like, no. And he's taller than me. And so, but that's just how I'm wired. But yeah, I think cultural does, steep in somehow, and I just, at this moment, I don't know how to fix that, but I hope, conversations can lead to that. And
it starts happening.
Yeah, being involved and brought up in the church, like, like, hey, parents, we got to do better.
Yeah.
Because even some kids have to do better. Yeah. Some kids have to do better, but for sure, I hope that changes as this new generation is coming out.
Yeah. And I can relate to that because I never heard an I love you growing up, ever. I didn't hear, I'm proud of you, good job, or, and I would come home and I'd be like, Mom, I got straight A's or something, and she'd be like, as you should. Yeah. And I was like, okay. And, me and my siblings, like I said, we didn't really grow up close. So it's really amazing to me to hear, like how you are with your sisters. I'm like, that's so beautiful. Like, there's something so beautiful. Like, you have somebody to lean on forever. And it speaks to my heart. And I'm the youngest of 5. So, like, being the youngest, you're like your big siblings. They're like, okay, so what are you doing? Is this cool? Is this not? Well, you don't think that's cool, so I'm not gonna think that's cool, right? But it was a lot of just us going our separate ways, right? And when I came to Christ, there was something that shifted in my heart, and God told me, you have to be affectionate with your family. Because there's something with showing love physically that heals. Yeah. And it's beautiful that the Lord has given me that desire of, like, I'm always hugging them now, like, and it's beautiful to see because now they see me and they hug me. Oh. And they're like, hey, what's up, but it was so hard at first because it was very like, don't touch me. Yeah. And it's just so cool. And my mom's like, okay, I love you when I leave the house now, when I go to see her. Love you. Or she says, AB, te amo. And AB says, te amo. And it's just so beautiful to see it because there's healing in hugs. There's healing in love. There's healing in, like, hearing, I love you. I accept you. You're perfect. Like, you are wonderfully made, And then it brings me back to Psalms. I think it's Psalms 91 or 93. Where it says that the Lord is your rock and he won't let you, perish or something like that. But it talks about love and how his love, like, heals and makes you better. And I think that's one of the best things that's ever happened to me. I'm like, I'm so affectionate. I love it. I'm like, I tell my friends all the time, I'm like, I love you. I hope you have a great day. Remember that the Lord loves you too. Like, I'm just always throwing out there and, like, making sure that they know that they're enough, they're loved, they're created with purpose, and we were created for such a time as this. You can do everything you want to, and as long as you have the Lord in front, everything will work for good. And it's just really cool, to hear that you're also like that, because I get that, I get it, because even with my other brother, like, he had never told me I love you, and I'm just like, he told me, and I'm like, I love you. I was like, I love you very much too. And it's just like a vibe, it's just it's cool.
Even till now, like, I'm 29 years old, and when I hear my dad saying I love you, I'm like, like, I'm still like,
it's healing.
It really is. But the big thing with, like, my family is just like, their I love yous is more of an action. And again, it took me a while to interpret that because I needed to hear it and feel it. But again, I had to be very forgiving, and I asked God to open my eyes. Like, when I tell you that, I would pray to God about so many things in my life, and I'm grateful that he opened my eyes. And, like, I would not be the person that I am if it wasn't for prayer and it wasn't for those encounters, those hardship. But my family is very big on actions when it comes to love. Showing love, it's an action. It's a very big action, and they won't say it a lot, but they will definitely show it. They will definitely show it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you want to tell people about anything at all? If actually, let me ask that again. If you were talking to the younger self that rebelled, what would you tell her?
Oh my. Well, a lot of things I would tell her. Something I would tell my younger self. I think there's a lot. Like accepting advice, accepting, when you're, wanting to be guided in the right direction. Like I wish I would have just accepted more of the guidance that was given to me, but I was being rebellious. But I think one thing that I reflect on with that question is just like I wish I was just kinder to myself. If I would have been kinder to myself, I think I wouldn't have accepted so much. What is the word? So much like rejection and just like negativity from people. Because if I would have been kind to myself, again, I wouldn't have accepted it. But because I wasn't kind to myself, I wasn't allowing others to be kind to me.
Right. You're kind of accepting the negativity and the
yeah. So those living a life kind of like negative and like in a dark place, like you end up straying to different things and different people involved in your life, and you're allowing them to speak to you a certain way and not defending yourself. So I wish I would have been kinder, so I would have been able to defend myself at a younger age, and I think I would have saved myself a couple hard moments.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, so
you're kind to yourself now, right?
I am. I have my moments that but I don't speak to myself as negatively as I used to. That's like cool. I can't do that, because it's just like, how dare I speak to a person that, and I'm not saying it in a prideful way, but a vessel just like yourself that God created and molded in His image, that He has loved, that He loves and separated. Who am I to speak negative and wrongly? Only because I allowed somebody else to doesn't mean that I should carry those words when God didn't create me that way. Right. So I just can't speak to myself like that. We all have our moments, but I worked really hard to be kinder to myself.
Perfect. That's great to hear that. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you guys found this fruitful. But that's all we have for this week. Make sure that you subscribe, like, and share the podcast if you found any value in it. I always say that the podcast only grows with people who share it organically. It's the most beautiful way to just spread love and kindness. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next week.